Hey,
Welcome,
Mike.
everybody. Welcome, Mike.
Hey, good.
Great to meet you. Uh,
Likewise, nice to meet you, Kevin. Great to
I
see you,
know.
Andy.
It's good to see
Yeah.
you. So, Mike, why don't you tell us about yourself? How'd you end up here? I mean, besides me sliding into your DMs, but tell us who you are.
Hey, I slid into your DMs. Let's be clear.
That's very
Um,
fair.
yeah, that was big news on the Val front. So I think that's when we first got connected. Yeah. So my name's Mike. I live in Southern California. Moved down here from the Bay Area during COVID. Father of three kids, 10, 8, and 4. My life is half startups and half children's sports. It's ridiculous the amount of sports that we have to accommodate on every weekend and evening. But yeah, third time founder, co-founded a company called Degreed back in 2012. Started an online school called MissionU in 2016. That was acquired by WeWork in 2018. And then on the heels of that, we had built some recording meeting management software at MissionU, and that was kind of the impetus for starting Grain in 2018. So been running Grain for 5 years and just handed over the reins to a new CEO who is doing a phenomenal job. And my stress levels are dramatically less than they were a few months ago. So he's been great. That's kind of like a little bit of the skinny on who I am.
I mean, that's awesome. So normally we shoot for second time founders, but you're a third time founder. I mean, we really got lucky here today.
To be honest, I feel like first time CEO is first time founder. It's like it was a big learning curve. I always thought like, oh yeah, I can do that. I mean, I watched them do it. I
Right.
feel like in many ways, yeah, it's not the same beast. It's a very different beast, as you know.
Yeah, no, I mean, I really do know that. I did. First time COO as a founder, second time CEO. So it's definitely the monkey's on your back, right?
Oh yeah,
What
it's a different ball game.
what is grain for everybody who may not know?
Yeah, so we started with kind of like a video meeting CMS, a content management system. That's what Mission U had built. We used it to record all of our student lectures and our admissions interviews. And so when we got acquired by WeWork, I was like, that's the company I want to build. I didn't know it was going to be called Grain yet. So I
Right.
got them to give me an intellectual property rights kind of carve out from the acquisition, so they couldn't come after me later
Smart.
saying, hey, we acquired that. And started Grain. So where that's where it kind of started at. Where it's ended up is actually being like a sales and conversation intelligence for SMB and mid market companies. So enterprise, there's tools out there like Gong or Chorus got bought by Zoom Info that are pretty, I would say, robust solutions on the enterprise level. But Grain has been kind of I would say within the last year, it's been our focus of being more of like the AI sidekick for the sales manager to have better insights into deal management, what's happening in the conversations, and rep performance of like how they're doing relative to playbooks. So that's Grain in
So I think
2024.
something you and I have talked about. I mean, we're in a very interesting market. You kind of go up against some of the most well capitalized companies in the entire world. You have to fight for
Yes.
AI talent. I mean, we're applied AI companies. How do you think about that? How do you
Yeah,
build AI SaaS today when you're going after behemoths?
with a lot of gumption and pain tolerance. Like, yeah, I mean, the reality is, and this is just me, speaking probably more loosely than I normally would on a podcast, but that's kind of the point of this
All
podcast
right.
is like, I feel like the market, the climate, and this is what you and I talked about last time, Andy, is just so incredibly overfunded. It's not even that the problem is the big behemoths and the 800-pound gorillas like Gong, like whatever. That's great. Like Gong is a wonderful company that like really, they're amazing what they've been able to do. That's expected. The challenge competing in this space is that Microsoft is beating everyone to market because of their partnership with OpenAI. And we're like, that's our freaking product roadmap. And you just released it. It would take us 6 months to build. But they were, for the first time, like this huge behemoth that's supposed to be like years behind, they were ahead. So that's kind of like the challenge on one direction. And then the challenge in the other direction is that with 0% interest rate climate, VC just became like way too big as a category. So therefore you ended up with way too many investments, and then markets became way too crowded, and you need network effects to be able to like justify a venture backed return. And when those returns, like I would say the market for a product is really strong, but it's being split amongst, I don't know, 15 VC backed companies that are like, you
Right.
know, the nth company, and not all of them are necessarily like going to last forever, but like, and then there's also subtle differences on, who's a competitor and who's not, whether it's like just about the note taking or if it's about conversation intelligence. But as a whole, there's been so much funding that it's created a very difficult climate to kind of like break out to the scale that's necessary for venture returns. So like Grain's doing very well, but like I want us to do better. And it's very difficult to do so when you're kind of like sharing, the market with way more competitors than have ever historically really existed in a, kind of venture scaled tech environment.
It resonates
That's
with
my
me.
truth.
It's
It's tough.
very tough. It's the first
Yeah.
time incumbents actually have it's every time that you see a technology shift, incumbents have an advantage. It's the first time they've actually executed on the advantage that I've seen. I mean, the last time I can
Right.
think about this is
Right.
Apple
100%,
launching
man.
the iPhone. I mean, that's what Microsoft has pulled off here.
It's crazy, man. And you know what I think that means is that, and that's what we decided to make the strategic shift. We looked at it and we were like, man, Microsoft just like took our horizontal roadmap and released it into their core product with their distribution and bundling advantages. And how do you compete with that? The answer is you don't. Like you really can't. And so there are opportunities, but you have to niche down. And so um, that was, I think, the challenge that we both had, building, I would say, competitive products that were explicitly horizontal in this space where you have this game changing technology, that the horizontal plays are going to be best built by the platforms that provide the core infrastructure of delivery of the audio video. And that's where Vowel was, I would say, far more ambitious than Grain, to be frank, in that you were trying to replace the
Yeah.
entire stack, and not just integrate into Meet and Teams and Zoom, but be Meet and Teams and Zoom. And that's just an extremely ambitious and challenging prospect that requires incumbents to kind of act like the normal dinosaurs that we're used to. Like, what's this stupid world where they're like freaking Terminator showing up, like, from the future, and you're like, What in the world? Like, this is stupid. I
What
don't like
what
this, version of the
I
of
can't
the multiverse."
what do you guys both think that has changed, that now the incumbents have kind of um woken up and seen their advantage, and before they were just so slow to build like competing products against startups? Like, do you think that they have learned from their mistakes? Is there just a much bigger head start for the incumbents, especially in your guys' space? Like, what do you think has
I
actually
think
changed?
I'll let
I'll
Andy run
start
with
with
that one
this. I
first.
think Satya at Microsoft is probably the best CEO in technology and has proven to be the best CEO time and
Agreed.
time again. And what's going on is he's executing so well at Microsoft that it's forcing everyone else to play defensive. So he's playing 3D chess and everyone else is playing checkers. And I think you're seeing that with basically Microsoft being 2 years ahead of Google, more or less on AI. When Google invented all this AI technology, i.e., transformer models, they just didn't ship it, and they let everyone leave and go start OpenAI, and OpenAI commercialized it, and Microsoft was there waiting in the wings. And I mean, people forget that Microsoft had Microsoft Research forever, and it basically did nothing. And all of a sudden,
Hmm.
they do
Yeah.
a $10 billion investment in Execute, and it's put everyone else in tech on the defensive. And I mean, it's a very smart play because it's very symbiotic with Azure, and it takes Azure to probably the second cloud out there now, and potentially maybe the first in the future. I mean, I could just imagine to be in a room with him and see what his 10-year roadmap looked like in 2019 when he did this investment, and now what it looks like in 2023. I'm curious your opinion, Mike.
Yeah, I think that it is, I would say, most attributed to just great leadership that is outside of what we've seen from, I would say, the other behemoth competitors. And then the other part of it is I find increasingly the larger the company gets, the more that it's run by lawyers and the more risk averse that it gets. And somehow, like Microsoft has been able to kind of not be as like bogged down in lawyer hell that it seems like Google was on why they were like sitting on their hands. It's just a lot of it is like politics. A lot of it is, legal fear. Like I know I feel like, Zoom, a good partner of ours, but it does feel like they have been meaningfully impacted on the roadmap by like what the lawyers think, not what's best for the customer or what the user is. And like you just see that the bigger that a company gets. And I feel like there's something in the water in Seattle, that's like at Microsoft with Satya that's seemingly not getting bogged down in the muck of the politics of like, I wouldn't call it politics, sorry, of the I would say philosophical discussions, which I think have very good intentions, but are kind of rooted. I'd already mentioned Terminator Once. This will be my second Terminator reference. I just watched it for the first time as a quick aside. Grew up Mormon, never watched R-rated movies. And
Oh,
like
wow.
there's just this plethora of amazing movies from the 80s and 90s that I've never seen before. And so like just 2 weeks ago I watched The Terminator and Terminator 2, and Terminator 2 was better for a lot of reasons. We could get into that. But my point is that these like pop culture references I feel like have just like run the fear off the chain around like what's going to happen with AI. And you talk to really smart people like Andrew Ong from, AI Fund and Stanford, and he's like, I don't know, I was co-founded Google Brain, and I don't really see where the doomsday scenario really comes in other than replacement of labor, but which is real. But my point is that these environments just become kind of bogged down, and then there is an inability to act, and startups aren't bogged down in all of that because they definitely don't have an in-house lawyer. They don't have, by definition, a bunch of different kind of factions that they have to listen to and try to like find the middle ground in. And I believe that's got to be part of Satya's leadership style, is to be able to just cut through it with clear vision and saying, this is what we're going to do. And then aligning the troops to execute on it. And what they've done is just fundamentally different than the other behemoths in the space. And it's crazy.
Do you guys both think that, like, obviously there's been a lot of antitrust? I don't believe in the AI space yet, but obviously we have Figma, a few other startups that actually, like, the FTC has actually put a stop to those acquisitions. Do you think that that's a good thing for the startup ecosystem to allow these companies to innovate, or do you think that we should just have a free market, and a large company should be able to acquire, like Microsoft, more or less, acquiring OpenAI, more like, um, and just kind of like sucking all of the air potentially out of like these ecosystems that, your guys as startups, it probably obviously stifles them and their creativity that, once was, startups can execute faster, they're more creative and all those different types of things. Do you guys think that the FTC taking a hard stance on a lot of these places is a good thing for startups and the overall like economy, like the tech
I'm
economy?
just a libertarian by background, so I'm gonna go with no. I generally don't love overarching regulators. I also think what's so unique about this is it's not the technology, it's the capital. That's really what it is. Like once OpenAI releases a fundamental model, GPT-5, you'll see within 6 to 12 months or 18 months later, you're gonna have a copy of it. All it takes is actually the compute to train. there's really not a lot of independent IP here. It's just capital. So it's an arm. This is why you see these seed rounds for some of these venture-backed AI companies. They're raising 100 to 500 million dollars of seed funding because they have to. And look, it's not real money. It's compute credits. It's mostly compute credits, but that's what training foundational models really matters here. So I think you have to really separate what's going on the FTC side of like Figma and Adobe versus what's going on in AI, because I don't think it matters if Microsoft acquires OpenAI. And I don't think they will do it. That's my gut. That's why they own 49% of it. Why would you want to take on
Yeah,
the risk? You can just get the products. You're getting the products. You're getting them as a compute customer. Again, it's 3D chess.
I completely agree. I feel like it's kind of window dressing and just like insurance policy for them about whether or not, OpenAI is officially part of Microsoft or effectively part of Microsoft. We saw when, Sam got ousted that it was a matter of just inevitability that they would be officially part of Microsoft, versus its ability. So it doesn't really have the ability to operate independently, largely because, Sam and Satya's relationship is obviously like really strong. And um, the troops are behind Sam, and that's there isn't that independence that you would normally have from a governance structure. And I think a lot of that is because they kind of had a Bokitaman village of a governance structure, as it turns out, and it wasn't as nearly as independent as it could or should have been. Um, or frankly, as maturely run as I think I'm sure the intentions were strong, but like that was not a mature process to, especially not of a $70 billion valued company to go about the ousting the way that it went about. I think anyone can objectively look at that and see that there was much to be desired there. But I would say like the direct answer to the question for me is I also have a libertarian bent. Bill Gurley had a presentation at the All In Summit this year on regulatory capture that I just thought
You
was
did?
like one of the most explanatory things that is applicable across so many different things. And generally speaking, it's in regulatory capture is propped up by incumbents to entrench their position as incumbents and to stifle innovation, and it's
Right.
generally anti-competitive, even though the point of it is to try to like be more competitive. And if I look at like the acquisition of Figma getting blown up, it was objectively better for Figma. Like Figma is going to be the
Yeah.
shareholders of Figma
Yeah.
will almost certainly realize better and higher returns as a result of this deal being blocked. It's just that there's going to be a more of a delay. And obviously the time value of money, maybe it'll end up being kind of the same depending on how Figma gets. But I mean, just with how great Figma's, market penetration is, their size, their execution ability, they're going to, I think, be better off by being independent of Adobe than being part of it. Just because of I would say how much growth potential I feel like Figma still has. But it without a doubt had a cooling effect on this kind of like baked in assumption when you're a founder or when you're a VC, believing that you can have these quote unquote soft landings, even though that's the most overused term of 2023. Now going strong in 2024. Of these soft landings where you end up, kind of put in. So I don't think that the Figma deal is like a great example of a soft landing. That's a, venture returned outcome that's objectively,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
fund returning. But I do think that the more challenge, the more regulatory pressure there is, the more cooling that there is on the optionality of what can happen to try to salvage an investment that didn't become a fund returner, or get a 1 or 2 or 3x return on a company. And to be frank, like I don't think in practice, like the FTC is not going to go after a 50 to 100 or even a couple $100 billion acquisitions. Like they're just going to leave them alone. They don't care. So I don't think there's in actuality any cooling, but I think that the concept of it will create a little bit of associative cooling for now while there's recency bias. But in the long term, I don't think it really,
But let's
makes
go
a
to
difference
another
at all.
company. So I mean, we're all talking about Figma, but I mean, I don't know if anyone saw what happened today with iRobot and Amazon. So the FTC blocked that deal. I think it was either a 1.4 or 1.9 billion dollar acquisition. So
I did
the F
not see that actually.
I didn't see
So
that either.
so
explain what happened there.
iRobot, the robot that sits in my kitchen and sometimes is loud in this podcast, signed an agreement to get acquired by Amazon. I love the product personally. It was somewhere like between 1.4 and 1.9 billion dollars. It was going through antitrust review forever. I believe the EU this morning decided to block it. The CEO and founder, I think, resigned today, and the company is now a $400 million or $500 million market cap company. So this is the opposite example of Figma. This is where
Yeah.
regulators destroyed shareholder value. Like, and it's a public company, so you get a mark on a daily basis. So I think what's going on in our ecosystem is it's much harder to get these deals done. So yes, it benefits the Figmas of the world. The market leading company that would have done a $20 billion acquisition, they probably end up being standalone. And then the question is, it's their execution. But for anyone else at the 300, 400, $500 million outcome, it is depressing M&A for the whole ecosystem itself.
Which is then going to depress like overall investment in the VC category, which in some ways is needed. But going back to what I was saying earlier, there was like an over investment with 0%, interest rates. But I don't necessarily, I want it, but I don't want it that this way, if that makes sense. I want a cooling in the category from raising interest rates, which makes, economic sense and is part of the cyclical process, not from like, unnecessary, I would say regulatory burden that just is baked into the economics of how the entire category works. So you're
Right.
just going to see less money in the category. Therefore, there's going to be fewer companies funded. Therefore, there's going to be less innovation, which is not good for, I would say, innovation in America. It's the FTC in this case, and I'm not super informed. I just found out as Andy was bringing it up, but that does not feel like it is. It's hard to understand what is supposed to be accomplished like at this point. Are we just blocking things for the sake of blocking things, or would the iRobot Amazon combination just be so unpalatable to the average consumer that thank goodness for the regulators to jump in here and basically destroy a company?
Do you think that, because obviously us as founders are pretty resilient, and I think that even like other categories like SaaS multiples coming down, it's harder to compete in that market. Do you think that there's just going to be different types of companies? Like I'm gonna plug my company here right now, but like it's a marketplace, and like marketplaces, once they get started, it's extremely hard to compete with them. So do you think a lot of these different things, so like, and as you mentioned, like the capital, having that much capital or compute in the AI space is really going to make a big differentiator. A SaaS tool is going to have to be that much that much better. So use Rippling as an example. You're going to have to spend a lot more to kind of have a lot more differentiating features. Or I'm a huge believer in marketplaces, because I think that they're really hard to start, but also like the incumbents it's really hard for them to really compete when you're super at scale. Think of the Ubers and the Airbnbs and all of these other marketplaces. So do you think that founders are going to be like resilient enough to kind of like pick these different categories, or do you think that this was just kind of a ZERP, people who are just like looking at, and even crypto like falls into this kind of a trap as well? It's just like, what's the real defensibility of a lot of these things? Obviously, some of them are marketplaces, but like a lot of these other types of crypto projects and everything, the defensibility, like that's what I kind of really look towards when I evaluate a startup, is like how can somebody else not eat your lunch? And do you guys think that there's just going to be founders that are going to just build different and more defensible longer term, and then also the funding will follow
I
that
don't
as
know.
well.
So like, I have an MBA. Like we've all looked at like Porter's five forces. You can look at all these different ways, SWOT analysis, different ways to think about it. At the end of the day, most defensibility outside of like a capex to a plant te and network effects to a business doesn't really exist. So everything else is just it's either network effects or CapEx, more or less. So will founders be ingenious and find other categories? Sure. Should these other categories be VC backed? Unclear. That's where I would go. I think every time VC starts to drift outside of core software, outside of hard tech, outside of biotech, on a specialized healthcare funds, it ends up producing typically terrible returns. I think DTC consumer is a great example of this. We we can start
Great
looking at
example.
other type of categories where you wanted to get a tech multiple, but you didn't. And long-winded way of
Yeah.
saying like the industry is probably too big. There are the entrepreneurs are going to innovate. They will figure out ways. Are people going to build incredible companies with small amounts of capital? Yes. Look at Midjourney. It's like 12 people and $100 million of revenue. It's doable. So I think there's just too much money out there funding too many ideas that leads to bad risk taking. Eh, that's my view in the category. SaaS was the place to make money in the last 15 years. Build a SaaS company.
Is
I
it
don't know.
still?
I think that you're just seeing like, as a 3-time founder, the thing I'm souring on is the um, raise a bunch of money to spend X years of your life to try to go big or go home. And then you're left with kind of like the scraps afterwards if it doesn't end up being, because you're not really playing your game or even your customer's game. You're playing the VC's game. And I think that that's now changing as there is so much money in the category. It's kind of easier to say no to, frankly. I think before it was like such a scarce commodity. I remember the first company we started in 2012. It was like we raised some money from the MacArthur Foundation as like a grant. That was the first money in, and then it was like 50K here, 50K there. It took us 18 months to raise our first million. It was like crazy. And I think at the end of the day, now that's a very successful business, but that sort of discipline was, I think, really important. And as the category became so, I would say, overpopulated, um, it's the average venture capitalist that I know, I generally really like. I find them to be good people that are trying their best, but everybody's self-interested. And it's hard to ignore the 2 and 20 management fees. Some funds are even worse, and so they're getting paid and their risk is distributed across a larger across an entire portfolio. And you experienced founders have to kind of like, most of the time you don't really know that that's the game that's getting played when you go into it. You're just like pumped and you want to go to Y Combinator or you want to change the world and you read the Steve Jobs book or watched the Social Network or something. And I got to be honest, I think as a 25-year-old watching the Social Network, I was like, if he can do it, I can do it. And that was probably my catalyst to getting into startups. And now I'm 37 and a little bit wiser and a lot more
And a little
tired.
bit more jaded like
But
the
like,
rest of us.
yeah, I think jaded is inevitable because you realize that the game is definitely not like set up in favor of the founders. And then the founders realize that the game is not set up in favor of the employees, even more so. There's like another level at which it is kind of like just a cultural norm of being like, oh, we all get equity, but like there's a very different, there's a very different economic equation for the founders who get restricted stock that, is, subject to QSBS after 5 years, and your average employee that's like exercising it. And in the early stage can just be, a lot higher risk than I would say your average startup employee probably realizes that they're taking on. And I would say the startup is a lot higher risk than the average founder probably realizes that they're taking on relative to the market opportunities. So I think what you're going to see is an increase in these mid-journey type of companies that take on little to no, very small teams that are super, um, running super, I would say not economically efficient. And you just control a lot more of your destiny because like where I'm at now is the last thing I want to do in starting a new venture is put myself in a position where I'm like not going to get a return on my investment of my time and energy and attention. And that happens a lot in venture. We just kind of like write it off as a community as like a sunk cost of the whole game. And it's like, it really doesn't have to be that way if you start a company in a little bit different way. Um, that there's like frankly, it's harder to do that as a first time founder, and it's much easier to do it as a second time founder or third time founder because you have more experience. You probably have you can build something much more efficiently, and it wouldn't cost you as much to get it off the ground. And depending on the outcome of the first venture, you may have more personal capital to play with, and longer personal runways before you kind of have to face that trade off of rich versus king, where you decide to give up some of that, get control of your outcome to bring some funding into the business, which may not necessarily be the right choice. It may be the right choice, but it kind of forces you into the go big or go home game that is uh, not
Well, I
always the
mean,
best
there
game to
used
play.
to be, and
And that
there are these case studies out there, these massive outlier companies that people don't realize it that were fully bootstrapped. I mean, let's think about Atlassian out of Australia. I think first 11 years of existence, one password out of Canada. Uh, you've got Qualtrics out of
Qualtrics in Utah, their first money in was like a Sequoia 45, I think it was $45 million, and it was like
Yep.
secondary to the
Zapier
like founders, and
and
it wasn't even into the
Zapier.
business. Zapier is the same, yeah. Wistia, I've talked to their founder about
Calendly,
this very
another
topic.
one. So there are these outlier
Mhm,
big
Calendly, yeah.
companies that Procore. I think that was most.
Come on, Calendly is getting hit by all different
It's still a
areas.
massive business, Kevin, with dominant market share and
It is
generates
today.
significant amount of
It is
EBITDA.
today. You're
Like
right.
you can talk crap about it all you want, but that messes with the terminal multiple.
I mean, I'd be happy to be
He's the
Tote, and he's a
man.
very nice guy. I really like
Yes.
him
He's
a
a
lot.
good friend of mine.
He's
Yeah.
he's in a very good place. Yeah.
But could you also say that, like, the other argument can be made that the markets are just so much larger, right? Like on such a global scale, and software runs every single part of our life, of everybody's life. And it's just that we've all just been concentrated into like building kind of these SaaS tools. But there still is so many other industries that really have not had, like Procore is a great example. And there's so many other industries that can have these massive outcomes. And I think that my personal opinion is that people are going to realize that, yeah, like SaaS is going to be a tough one. I think that unless you're doing something extremely specific and you probably have like some like, something in the world that nobody else does, and it probably is going to take you like 3 to 4 years to build this, and you're going to have some real defensibility. But the, I would make the argument that like markets are bigger than ever. But I think that what's happened is that the tools that we use, the funding that we have, like there's just really no real defensibility. So I think, and this kind of goes to the whole show here. I think, and what Mike you kind of touched on is that like the second, third, fourth time founders are going to have like the massive advantages. They're going to have the scar wounds. They're going to understand some small thing that nobody else could really do. They're going to be able to raise the more capital, and they're going to have some real. I think what we're all talking about here is like defensibility. That I think is something that every founder should really think about. That early days, yeah, like 10 years ago, you could build an iPhone app and you could grow it to like even think of a company like Calm. It would be a great example of uh, uh, obviously a great. I use the product, great product, but like if like it would be pretty easy
Let
to
me say it like
replicate
this.
that today.
Almost no moats really exist outside of brand and network effects.
I was gonna say brand. That's the like big thing that's the elephant in the room we haven't been talking about. But with you,
Network
brand,
effects, and if
That's a
you're
good
Apple, you
that's a
can
good
build
point.
custom chips. That's it. There is no most of the time there is no real technology advantage in anything we're talking about. Yes, we're not talking about quantum computing or semiconductor R&D or maybe nuclear reactors. But in anything that most of the people on this podcast are listening to or that most of us have experience in, there are no barriers to entry and there's pretty much no moat. A network effect is a moat that everyone always talks about on Silicon Valley. And like if we go deep down in marketplaces, there are only a few case studies where one massive horizontal marketplace ends up winning. I think one is eBay, but again, there are vertical versions of those. And two is probably Uber. And yeah, they beat Lyft and they ended up beating it because
And
but
Airbnb,
it's
Airbnb
not
too.
dominant. There's still VRBO. It's a big brand. It's not dominant in the way that Uber is so much more dominant.
I love that you said VRBO too, because I refuse to say Verbo. I'm just like,
I hate when they
I
say
won't do
that.
it.
I see that those in the commercials, they're like Verbo. It's like it's
Mm-mm.
And they
VRBO.
average.
It's VRBO. To stop, they were like this like archaic, janky website from the
Yeah.
90s that totally ruined their core service, in my view, by becoming Verbo and trying to compete with Airbnb. But
So
yeah,
I
I'm
mean,
with you.
yes, it's Airbnb, it's Uber, and I mean Uber won because they had the food delivery. That's the end of the day. They were playing executing better. So I mean, where I was going,
There are some interesting examples of growth, like with
DoorDash as
Slack,
well. Let's add
right? With
DoorDash in there.
Figma, with I would say Loom, some of these others that like were able to create
Loom's a
yeah,
great
these
example. Yeah.
yeah, these viral growth that are
that's
they're
Calendly.
non-marketplaces that were able to meaningfully get network effects
Yeah,
and then build their
Yeah.
brand.
brand driven
Yeah.
virality. If you can build a viral product that actually has,
Mhm.
so every founder in every pitch talks about their viral growth, right? I'm sure you've done it, Mike, and like we've been
Oh,
competing
yeah.
against each other for 5 years.
It's so much harder to do, but also we had the challenge that I definitely didn't I took for granted or I didn't give it the realization, which is that like if you're Notion or if you're Slack or you're some kind of I would say asynchronous first product that you can experience in the comfort of your home, or office or whatever without the social pressures, that has just inherently a behavioral advantage to be, or I wouldn't even just say advantage, and it's a necessity. And the challenge with like, say, Grain or Vowel, like going viral, and there's a reason no one in the space is really like blown up in the same network effects type of viral growth loops, is because you have this behavioral discomfort of being like, oh, okay, cool. There's this recorder in here. And it's not like there's one discomfort, there's like five. And you're like, okay, I have to like think about being on this meeting, but also think about what this thing is. I have to think about what it's doing. I have to think about and people just choose not to think. And so, and then therefore it doesn't grow. And, or I would say it doesn't grow at that viral network effect growth rate that is necessary to really produce the venture returns. And so then in our space particular, I'm getting very specific now. When you have an overfunded, environment, you just end up with a bunch of companies growing really slowly and kind of like really making it so that like it's kind of it really is a zero sum, and then kind of nobody is like winning if winning is defined by a
Well,
venture returning outcome.
so it's
And
funny you say Notion because
yeah.
I'm friends with the first head of marketing and the first head of growth there. And I think Notion is a lot of luck
Hmm.
and very, very, very good execution. Like Coda is the antithesis of
Totally.
we've all seen 9 other versions of documentation or database built documentation tooling. Why did they go viral and why did they not? I can't tell you. I think Notion was better on the
But I know their competitive advantage now is their
yes.
brand. Like fundamentally, you hear the name Notion, you're like, that's cool. Why is it cool? Is it cool because it's big or is it big because it's cool? I don't know. It's a bit of a chicken and egg, but like I can tell you before it was big, it was cool. And like their brand had just been associated and they just I would say meticulously curated this community of I would say kind of creator economy folks that then turned it into what it is today. But it is definitely like a case study in really good execution mixed with a lot of luck that turned into, a really strong brand moat
Yeah.
that
I
no
mean, it's
one can really
community driven
touch.
marketing. That's really what it was. They went out, they created these evangelists. These evangelists brought them into their company. And now people see Coda and we all see it. I mean, like, I'm sure you've been seeing the airport ads in San Francisco or so on and so forth. And you're like, what is this? And
Hmm.
they're spending outsized economics on billboards and outdoor ads to try to convince you to use this. And you're like, oh, it's a Notion competitor, right? I mean,
But my hot take is that the nefarious part of examples like Notion and Slack and Figma and these just like breakout companies is that the next generation of founders, I mean, it's literally thousand, maybe 5,000 to one in terms of the number of founders that end up getting to those outcomes. But a huge percentage, 50% upwards of those founders are modeling, or I would say maybe because not all of them are necessarily going like PLG bottoms up, but almost all of them are going PLG bottoms up are like modeling after these success stories. And the reality is that you can't really like bottle up a huge chunk of what made these things so successful. Like if Stuart Butterfield wasn't the CEO of Slack, launching it, from his public speaking gigs, with the reputation, of being a Flickr founder, like it's probably not, that's not super replicatable from another founder. And that's why those founders get outsized investment as they should, because they have a much higher chance of being successful. But yet, whenever the talking
we're talking
heads,
heads
I would
now.
even put us in that, like, want to, yeah, we're talking heads. But I guess I'm like doing the opposite of it, where it's like, don't model after Figma. It's like, yeah, they're amazing company, but don't expect
I
their
couldn't agree
path
with
to
you.
be your path because it's very, very unlikely. And don't put all of your eggs in that basket because you're going to end up it's very unlikely that you'll get the same, network effects and growth and the brand, competition. And there's probably better, I would say lower potentially returning paths you could take, but higher probability of a lower success outcome that you could take if you weren't so like focused on becoming the next cool notion or whatever else that may be. And I would say I fall into that trap like over and over it.
Everyone wants to to start sexy companies. Nobody wants to build
Mhm.
construction software. And yet I can and I can
100%. But yet that's where the
I couldn't agree with
opportunities
you
are.
more.
Like Vowel was absolutely like an attempt at a sexy company. Like it's Grain, the same thing. I would say Grain now is like kind of accepted that the horizontal play has been competitive away. And we're like, okay, we'll compete in the existing market for conversation intelligence and differentiate
100%.
on who we're selling it to. But that's not what I wanted to do. Not even a year ago did I want to do that. But I kind of like resigned that that's what the market could support for our business that would give us the best opportunity to continue to provide a service, to be able to grow and be successful. And I think anybody who's starting a new company that's a second time founder or third time founder can recognize just I'm personally now allergic to horizontal things. I'm just like, no, because you're then being immediately having to like be subject to what we were talking about earlier of like the innovation prowess of Microsoft, which is something I thought I'd never
So I
say
think
a few years
mine is
ago,
very
you know?
unusual, and my first company was very vertical focused, Nanit, and my second company is very horizontal focused. So I
Mhm.
think you learned the lesson a few times over. Uh, My second time was the first time I had to deal with
I'm
this.
pretty stubborn.
So here's something I don't think your hot take's even a hot take. I think just more people need to call it what it is. A lot of this is luck with good execution, and those are those 1 in 10,000 companies. And don't model yourself off of them.
Totally. And not taking away from good execution. That is like absolutely necessary. But I know a lot of companies with great execution that have not had that success because
Yeah. I would
weren't in the
rather
right place at
be
the right
every
time.
day of the week in a incredible market and be a B player with B execution than be an A team in a B market. I've seen this time and time again.
Totally.
Great market, everyone
100%.
wins.
Well, then this is interesting. So going back to our first conversation, how would you um what are the attributes for you to define a great market with the experience and kind of pain and joy and various things you've been through? How do you like think
4 or
about what
5
makes a
large
great
private
market?
equity backed players in that market already, in a earning good free cash flow. The market is organically growing. There are not
Yep.
a lot of venture entrants. Uh, I and the ability to sit there and say, I can differentiate against somebody and I have a lower cost of capital. I think that's one way to think about it. That's something I've been thinking about a lot lately. I think a lot of the other stuff we see in venture is why now? Why now is very important too. So, I mean, why now?
Yeah.
I spoke to a founder who's building AR software. I mean, AR has been a horrible market for the last 12 years. I mean, probably $20 billion has gone into the category. Maybe it's closer to 10, and it's basically produced almost no returns. Now Apple's entering the category and it's going to heat up the category. So is there an inherent why now to building software for people to build in AR communities, AR experiences? Yes. So I mean, why now on Uber? iPhone enabled you to aggregate the supply and demand. That was never available before.
Right. And that's always going to change with any new technology and all these different things. And that's why I'm very bullish on technology in general. And there's right now we see the compression in a bunch of different categories and the incumbents and coming in and all this, but there's going to be something else. It
That's the
always
optimism.
happens. And now is it AI? Is it AR?
And
Did you guys talk about
yeah.
the last thing,
No, I'd
the
like to
remote
talk before
versus
we
in
go to that
person?
though. Mike, you have the most interesting
Sure,
story of
yeah,
anyone I know.
please.
I mean, you've basically fired yourself, more or less. I mean, you and you didn't do it because your board said to do it. Like we all know the stories of getting pushed out by your board, but you
Yeah.
chose to fire yourself. Tell us why. Tell our listeners why you thought somebody else was in a better seat to run it. I mean, you've posted at length about this, but I think that's really important for our listeners to hear.
Yeah. Yeah. So for context, Grain is 5.5 years old. Um, Myself and the new CEO are the two board seats. So we don't really have to, we have full board control. And there was never a suggestion of anybody else other than me. Honestly, I feel like a lot of it goes back to my first company. I had a pretty messy breakup that I had to realize after years that was my fault more than, it's easy to be angry at other people and it's easy to. So I had a good, very expensive, that probably cost me. I mean, I know it ended up costing me tens of millions of dollars for this lesson that I learned, but it's invaluable. And I honestly wouldn't
I've been
change it
there.
if I
I've
could.
been there.
Yeah. And because of that, I think I was able to recognize early on how much my ego was dominating my motives. And then in the second company, it was like I think I got another interesting take on it. And so by the time I got into starting Grain, I felt like I was starting it for the right reasons of as a creative outlet to make something great and awesome. And I think we did that. And I think we're still doing that. And I'm very proud of what we've done at Grain. But there's a lot that happens when you move from 0 to 1 and from 1 to 10. And then, we're not to 10 yet, but, there's a lot that happens after that transition. And I just looked at it and I wasn't getting I would say, I wasn't in the pure creator role anymore, right? I had given that to the new CEO. He was our head of product and he was doing a phenomenal job. And I found myself in situations where, as the CEO in charge of strategy, as a product led growth company, the head of product is the head of strategy. And the head of strategy used to be the CEO. And he had already been a CEO. And it was just kind of a no brainer. And it really I tried to give him the job a year before. And then it just, for whatever reason, we decided to make him president and I stayed CEO. And then a year later, it kind of came up again. It was like we were co-CEOing, but he was the one that was actually like running the show because the show is a product led growth company. And, our CAC is whatever our COGS are moved forward for how much of the product we give away for free. Like we don't really spend money. We have a marketing department of 0.5 right now. Like it's just very small. And my point is more so that the head of product needs to be the head of strategy and the CEO is the head of strategy at a small company. And I had a choice I had to reconcile this kind of like co-CEO thing. We get along extremely well. Let's be clear. There's no drama there, but it's just like everybody has a different point of view. And I had
Yeah.
my point of view and it's frustrating for him to try to have to like execute, what I wanted. And then he's the one on the hook to execute it. And then it's frustrating for me to like feel like the execution is different than what I wanted because it's impossible to like, it's not impossible, but it's very, very, very difficult to communicate at the level that's necessary to, um, I would say, keep that fully aligned. And so that alignment was taking up so many cycles that it just made a lot more sense to be like, well, that is now the time. Let's do it. And 5 days later, he was officially the CEO. And I wrote a blog post about it. I took like 3 weeks off for the first time in 12 years. I wrote a blog post about it on LinkedIn, which, I think my general style is to not hold back and just tell it how it is. And I like reading that content. So I figure other people do too. And it's been amazing. Like, honestly, it gave him the power and the ability to make this shift and to turn Grain into what feels like kind of an entirely new company. It's the same product, but it feels like a new company. We just got back from our offsite in Sundance, Utah, and he ran the offsite, and I like provided some, commentary and support. But like, he's running the show and he's doing great at it. And it was objectively the right call for me, for him, for our team, for our customers, for our investors. And I believe that we're going to get better returns as a result. And we could talk about the rich versus king trade-off, but like that's fundamentally what it kind of comes down to. And I won't go into detail because my monologue's been going on for a little bit,
Well, I
but
think I
that's kind
know
of the
the rich
story and
versus
that's
king
why.
trade-off. I think I know exactly what you chose. Two
Yeah,
years is a long time to think about something like that.
exactly. I mean, I'd been decided 2 years ago that I was like, you know what? I don't think I'm going to be the long-term CEO of Grain. Like, I love this stage. I don't know that I'm loving this new stage, and I don't know that I'm
Right.
best at it. And I think there's going to be better people. A year later, I hired Jeff through acquisition, was very open with him. Like, I'm not hiring you as CEO, but like, just to be clear, like I see that that could be on the table at Grain one day. I don't know. Just so
Right.
you know, I'm not just hanging that over you. Like, I genuinely don't see myself in the seat forever. And that kind of like was the seed that was planted that germinated for a year. And then I actually made the ask, and he said yes. And then we decided together, like, actually, because I'm the kind of marketing face of the company, why don't I stay in that role? And then he, has all the power that he needs in president. And that was like a Walter White Breaking Bad style half measure. Like, it didn't really work. And so no half measures. You got to
did you
go
just
full
watch
measures. So we
Breaking
did the full
Bad right
measure
now
the second
too?
time, and I just wish we would have done the full measure the first time.
Did you just recently watch Breaking Bad as well?
No, I just
I'm just
my
joking.
brain is like half pop culture references, whether it's Terminator or Anybody who spends a decent amount of time around me will find all the Adam Sandler quotes from the '90s
Right.
movies leak out. They just leak out. I can't really hold it in.
Well, I think that's a really great note to end on, and I don't know if you guys all agree. Like, I think that I don't know. Want to, but I'll just say it for myself. I think that like going through multiple founding of companies, you really do grow up a lot, and you really think like you're. I think earlier on in your career, at least for me, I was very ego driven. I had to be the king, and like and all of those things. I still do want to. Some that probably hasn't changed, but I'm much more open to different types of arrangements. And you also, I like to think of it as this is your career. It's going to be a long term, and you should really think about if you want to continue founding companies, that's your real career. And I think that. I don't know if you guys want to end on any closing thoughts about your just kind of your experience and how it kind of led you to what you're able to even just like think in your mind where like 10 years ago it would be like just insane.
You're one of the more self-aware founders who've ever come on this show. Just the way you were able to say that,
Thanks.
and I think
Yes.
everything you say
Yes.
is stuff that I think I know goes on in some of our co-hosts' mind, our guests' mind, and you just laid it out there. I mean, we've always talked about would you ever see positive CEO transitions, bring somebody new in, successful models of that. And I think this was probably for our listeners one of the better episodes we've had out there because you're that case study. And
Well, I'm glad. Thanks.
All right, well, let's end it there. That's a great ending. Mike, thank you so much for being a guest in the show. This was one of my favorite episodes.
Thanks.
And for everybody listening, we will catch you next time.
Awesome. I really enjoyed it. Thanks a lot.